Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here today as we begin our first talk in the series called the Deccan Conversations. I'm going to give you a brief introduction about Khidki and about our speaker and interlocutor today before I hand over to the speaker. Today, I would like to begin by talking about Khidki. At Khidki, we started in 2021, and in Khidki, the Khidki Collective is interested in regions and places, and we want to think about how multiplicities, diversities, and hierarchies, ways of life as it takes place within such spaces. We're also interested in engagements outside of academia. And as part of that, we've curated a series of public writings which have been published in both the News Minute and The Wire. We've also been, over the last couple of years, we've been organizing conversations which seek to bridge the gap between academic language and the public. So these have been some of the initiatives, and as part of that, we've started today the Deccan Conversations, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the idea behind thinking about this series. The Deccan has been a significant antipode to imperial North India across the last 2 millennia. However, the Deccan receded from political imagination decisively in the 1950s when the linguistic states of Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Kerala were formed. Our interest is in thinking about whether the Deccan has survived these nationalist linguistic articulations. Are there multiple articulations of the geographical and cultural imaginaries of the Deccan? How do we understand this interconnectedness of the region, both historically as well as ethnographically? Specifically, the questions that we've asked our speakers in the series is how does their engagement with the region open up pathways for academic practice? We've requested speakers to share insights from their work and why they're important for understanding the contemporary moment in India, in academia, or any other place that they find significant. So this is broadly the thinking that's gone behind organizing the Deccan Conversations. I'd like to also introduce our speakers, our speaker and our interlocutor. Let me begin by introducing our interlocutor. That's Dr. N. Manohar Reddy, who's
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, all right.
That's great. Yeah. So Dr. Manohar Reddy is Assistant Professor at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Law and Civil Society. He at NALSAR in Hyderabad. He teaches law and language, law and literature, and cinepolitics in India. His interests are in the fields of language politics in India, cultural studies, critical theory, Indian literature, and film studies. Before joining NALSAR, he was also an assistant professor and guest faculty at the Center for Comparative Literature. He's also been a Charles Wallace India Trust Visiting Fellow at the University of East Anglia. He's also been involved in translating short stories and essays from Telugu to English and vice versa. At present, he's translating Muhammad Khadir's stories from Telugu to English. Thank you, Professor Manohar Reddy, for being here with us. We really appreciate you taking time out to speak with us here. Okay, yeah. I'm going to go ahead to introduce Himabindu. Himabindu Chintakunta is a guest faculty at the Department of Communication in the University of Hyderabad. She's recently submitted her PhD entitled Language, Print, Regional Elite and Modern Associational Life in the Princely State of Hyderabad, a study of early 20th century Telugu press. Her research interests include media histories, film and cultural studies, gender and media. And we're extremely glad to have Himabindu here kicking off this series for us. Thank you so very much for agreeing to share your work with us. We're really looking forward to your talk. Thank you, Himabindu. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Swati. I would like, I have a presentation. I would like to share my screen now.
Yeah.
Just a second. Just before you begin, the talk is being recorded, and we are hoping that you're okay with this. I mean, both Dr. Manohar Reddy and Himabindu and the rest of the attendees just wanted to announce that the talk is being recorded, and we also intend to upload it later on onto the Khidki channel. Just seeking your consent for that, and yeah, that's.
All right, I am fine with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd also request everyone else apart from the speaker to mute themselves, and we can later on open up once the presentation is done. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, today my talk for the day is titled Telugu Periodicals and Networks of Public Life in the Princely State of Hyderabad. So when I decided to talk about this topic, because largely when we look at the scholarship in academia and outside around Princely State of Hyderabad, most of the time it is discussed with respect to political history largely, and there has been very limited discussion on cultural history of the region, of the Deccan region. And I thought my work contributes to that scholarship around cultural history of Princely State of Hyderabad with respect to Telugu print culture. So print efforts are largely studied in relation to making of nations. In the Indian context too, the connections are drawn to nationalism and anti-colonial nationalist struggle when print is studied. Several scholars have worked outside of these paradigms as well, and have looked at specificities that print technologies have in multiple and diverse contexts. For example, like Francisco Orsini's work on print cultures of North India, where she talks about Hindi literary sphere, which is significant in contributing to the idea of Hindi, Hindu, and Hindustani. And also Veena Naregal's work in the context of Western India, where she talks about bilingual elite, meaning people who are fluent and were working with both Marathi and English, and how they navigated the hierarchies of these languages. So for today's talk, particularly, I work in the Telugu print context, more so the context of Telugu newspaper scenario in the early 20th century Princely State of Hyderabad, to understand how newspapers were a part of larger discourse around language, literature, and history of the Deccan, and how they contributed to the discourse or the conversations that were happening around these categories of language, literature, and history, and were at the same time how print efforts were also continuing to grow because of the discussions that were happening around these categories. So primarily I engage with just a second, there is my presentation is stuck.
Okay. Try sharing it again. Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So through this talk, I would like to primarily engage with three important questions that I thought I could begin now itself. So when we are talking about print or print culture or print efforts. There are people who are establishing this print. There were people who are establishing newspapers and writing books and publishing them. And so who are these people who were involved in the making of newspapers in the princely state of Hyderabad, and how they were aiding the functioning of this newspaper is the first question. And next, I deal with their relationship with the princely state of Hyderabad itself. And thirdly, while they were creating these spaces, print spaces, they also held certain imaginations for the region and the nation, and how they saw that they could belong to these how they could belong to region and nation that were emerging at that point of time during the 20th century. So history of print is often connected to the growth of formal literacy and transitioning to modern technologies. And emergence of newspapers are described as society's attempts to engage with newer modes of belonging. And newspapers and periodicals are cited as arenas of public debate, modern reasoning, and reflective of historical processes that were happening in the societies towards making of languages and nations, and also beyond. So in the context of princely state of Hyderabad, the regional elite who were prominent in establishing these periodicals were dwelling upon the questions of language, literature, and history, which they thought were very important in creating and consolidating an idea of a region. They thought these ideas of language, literature, history were different from, say, affiliations like religion or caste. So they thought that they would foreground these ideas and draw solidarities based on these ideas while imagining region. But in this process of consolidating certain kinds of identities, they also did not let go of, because they also came from dominant communities of the region. The traditional authority that they were drawing based on hierarchies of class and caste was also coming into these modern spaces that they were imagining. So to illustrate this point, I established a relationship between Golkonda Patrika, which is a bi-weekly that was being published from the princely state of Hyderabad, and Nizam Rashtrandra Mahasabha, which initially started off as a literary organization to bring together the concerns of Telugu-speaking population in the princely state of Hyderabad, and Reddy Hostel, which was a residential space for the boys from the Reddy community who were coming to the city from the surrounding districts to so they needed a place to stay and get their education. So this Reddy hostel was built to become that kind of a space where the Reddy boys could stay and get educated. And another organization is Nizam Rashtrandra Saraswata Parishad, which identified itself as a solely literary organization. So these are the organizations broadly I'm going to dwell, and this formed the network of organizations, ideas, and people that I'm going to discuss further. So before getting into the details of these organizations, I thought I will give a brief background into the terms that I'm going to use from here on, like a regional elite or voluntary organizations, and a little background to princely state of Hyderabad itself. So during the 20th century, princely state of Hyderabad was a multi-tiered, multilingual region under the rule of Asafjahs, and it shared boundaries with Bombay and Madras presidencies and also the central provinces. It was composed of three regions: Telangana, Marathwada, and Karnataka. And Hyderabad city was the shared power center between the British resident, Asafjahs, Samsthana rulers, Jagirdars, and Zamindars. And Urdu was the official language of the state and language of the courts by the late 19th century. And other languages like Telugu, Marathi, Kannada existed as dominant vernaculars. And geographically, princely state of Hyderabad consisted of 16 districts. The description that I'm going to give is largely based on the revenue divisions that were made for administrative purposes. So princely state of Hyderabad consisted of 4 revenue divisions: Warangal Suba, Medak Suba, Gulbarga Suba, and Aurangabad Suba. So these are revenue divisions, and not necessarily in relation to the languages spoken, but for administrative purposes, the divisions were made. And within these, the Warangal and Medak Suba comprised of 8 districts and had most Telugu speakers. So this is the administrative structure of the princely state of Hyderabad, and this I draw from Benjamin Cohen's work on kingship and colonialism. And shifting the focus of scholarship from the urban Hyderabad city to a multi-tiered and multi-ethnic forms of political and administrative regimes that existed in Hyderabad State, Benjamin Cohen elaborates the layered structures of power with a focus on samsthanas. So samsthanas defined themselves as political structures that had roots in Kakatiya and Vijayanagar empires. When the bigger empires fell, the supportive kings continued in power as heads of samsthanas, thus tracing a medieval status, unlike the Paigas and Jagirdars, which came into existence after the emergence of Asarja rulers. So I gave this description because I'm going to talk about, I'm going to keep going back, keep referring to samsthanas and samsthana elite who contribute to print and public activity. So samsthanas so I'm quoting Benjamin Cohen here. The samsthanas and other forms of nobility comprise the third tier of Hyderabad's pyramidal political structure. At the top of the structure was the Nizam. Below the Nizam was the Diwan, who was responsible for overseeing the administration of the state. And there was British resident as well. And beneath, there was a wide spectrum of elites, including Samsthana Rajas, Paiga nobles, whose ancestors were bequeathed land by the first Nizam on a military tenure. Nobles at these ranks held land in the countryside and often aspired to higher rank by being patrons of artists, musicians, dancers, poets, and pundits. So these are some of the terms that I will elaborate on. So I use the term regional elite to refer to the members of dominant castes who were involved in literary and cultural production, that like establishing schools, establishing periodicals, setting up literary organizations. So this is what I mean by literary and cultural production. So I use the term regional elite to refer to members of dominant castes who were involved in literary and cultural production, along with their engagement in creating an active political life. Because some of the people that I refer to in the through the presentation, they went on to become political leaders as well in post-independent India and held positions. So I used so there is also, I could have also used the term vernacular because I'm dealing with vernacular languages, but then I chose to use the term regional elite instead. Because the term region would capture the relationship of the elite, both with the geographical region where they are predominantly present, and also their relationship with literary, cultural, and political practices and the futures they had. And next is the voluntary associations. So like I described, like I said in the beginning, primarily I would be looking at primarily I'll be looking at Andhra Mahasabha and Andhra Saraswata Parishad. These are the two organizations that I term as voluntary associations. So if we look at the colonial context in the 19th century, these voluntary organizations acted as links between intellectuals, so that intellectuals across regions, so that they could come together. And in Hyderabad, there were several associations or organizations like this, namely Hindu Mahasabha, Hyderabad State Congress, Andhra Mahasabha, Andhra Saraswata Parishad, Karnataka Parishad, etc. And all these associations held regional annual conferences regularly. And they were also linked to similar associations that were functioning from different regions, like the ones like the ones that were functioning from Madras or Bombay presidencies, because while Andhra Mahasabha, Nizam Rashtrandhra Mahasabha is specific to the princely state of Hyderabad and focused on the Telugu speakers, there was also Andhra Mahasabha that was being organized in the Madras presidency. So the intellectuals of different regions were actually in conversation with each other. So now I would like to give, if we come to the, if we look at the print, the nature of print in the princely state of Hyderabad, specifically Telugu print, the periodicals in Kannada, Marathi, and Telugu emerged predominantly during the first decades of the 20th century. The Telugu publishing history in the princely state of Hyderabad marks Sedya Chandrika, a monthly journal translated from Urdu to Telugu as the first attempt at Telugu journal and newspaper publishing. Following this, many journals, newspapers, and magazines were published later on. And Himabindu, which was published from 1913 to 14, is considered as the first Telugu journal. But most of the enterprises, most of these print enterprises did not have much support. Himabindu functioned between 1913 to 14, and Telugu Patrika, which was Telugu Patrika and Nilagiri. These were weekly periodicals, and they were both they both started in the year 1922 and kind of shut down very quickly and did not sustain for a long time. So now that I've named Himabindu, Telugu Patrika, and Nilagiri. Who were these people who were publishing these periodicals, and what kind of periodicals were these? So the editor of Himabindu, B. Srinivasa Sharma, was from Madhva Brahmana lineage and was an Ayurveda doctor by profession. The editor of Nilagiri, Shabnavis Venkat Raman Narasimha, belonged to a family of record keepers or Karanams. While Telugu Patrika's Oddiraju brothers were prominent literary figures in Telugu language, and the editor of Golkonda Patrika, Suravaram Pratapa Reddy, was from a Reddy community, which is a dominant landowning caste in Telangana. And Himabindu, at that point of time in 1913, which was published from 1913 to 14, it came out as a monthly journal, and it published it published articles on topics of social reform, on ideas of agriculture and other stuff. And both Nilagiri and Telugu Patrika were weeklies, and they focused on literary and cultural. They were emphasizing on literature and history and culture. And Golkonda Patrika, which I will discuss in elaboration now. So Golkonda Patrika started in the year 1926 as a bi-weekly under the editorship of Suravaram Pratapa Reddy, who identified himself as a moderate Congress nationalist. With the help of donations raised by Kotwal Venkatarami Reddy, who was a bureaucrat with the princely state, Suravaram procured a treadle press, typewriters from Madras, and set up Golkonda Patrika in Thurupazar. Prior to starting Golkonda Patrika, they were actively involved in the library movement and held crucial responsibilities in functioning of Sri Krishna Devarayandra Bhasha Nilayam, which is the first library set up in the princely state of Hyderabad in 1901. After receiving a degree in law from Presidency College in Madras Presidency, Suravaram returned to Hyderabad city and took up responsibilities of Reddy Hostel, which was a boarding facility to support boys from Reddy community who came to Hyderabad city for education. So these both Suravaram Pratap Reddy and Kotwal Venkatrami Reddy were actively involved in the activities of voluntary associations that like Nizam Rashtrandra Mahasabha and also Nizam Rashtrandra Saraswata Parishad. Like I said, Andhra Mahasabha was a Telugu literary and cultural organization which was set up to convene annual meetings for discussing concerns of Telugu speakers of the princely state of Hyderabad. And Saraswata Parishad was started as an exclusive linguistic or literary organization aimed at publishing books and popularizing use of Telugu language. And these are the headers I have of Golkonda Patrika from different time periods. And this is an advertisement from the Golkonda Press or the Golkonda Mudrakshara Shala, which kind of opens up its space. Golkonda Patrika was published from Golkonda Press, and apart from publishing their own periodical, it also was open for several other print works that were needed at that point of time. So the Telugu literary elite in their articles and biographies, Telugu literary elite like Madapati Hanumantarao, who was closely associated with Hyderabad State Congress and was also a prominent figure at that point, political and literary figure at that point of time. And Mandumala Narasimha Rao, who was the editor of the magazine Rayat, and Ravi Narayan Reddy, who was important figure in the functioning of Andhra Mahasabha and was a communist. So these Telugu literary elite in their articles and biographies comment on the absence of public life or engagement, which they call as Chaitanyamu. They think that there was an absence of public life or engagement among the Telugu speaking population until the early years of 20th century, and mark the establishment of Sri Krishna Devarayandra Bhasha Nilayam, which is a Telugu library, as the beginning of public engagement. So people like Madapati Hanumantarao and Suravaram Pratap Reddy had an opportunity to go outside of Hyderabad state to Madras Presidency to get educated in Telugu and also English. So they did not continue their, unlike Mandumala Narasimha Rao, who gets trained in Urdu. These people kind of move out and continue staying in Hyderabad. They kind of move out to Madras Presidency and have and get exposed to the Telugu language movement that was happening in the Madras Presidency. So the literary elite who received education in vernaculars from the Hyderabad state, and also the ones who went to Madras Presidency for education, both were interested in generating possibilities for a modern social life, where there would be conversations about social reform, education, and there would be an engagement with modern ideas of history and literature. And there would also be a possibility for creating resources, cultivating cultural resources in their vernacular language, which is Telugu. And this they felt was possible by creating institutions like libraries, publishing houses, and hostels. So now we understand that there was a certain kind of modernization project that they were interested in creating literature and history and provide the region with a very distinct character and a distinct literary history and a distinct history itself. So because I'm dealing, my research primarily deals with the archives of Golkonda Patrika and also the allied institutions. I would like to highlight and discuss 3 instances to make the larger point about how individuals and ideas were circulated in the networks. First instance is I would like to establish a relationship, the relationship between Reddy Hostel and Golkonda Patrika. And in my second description of the instance, I would like to highlight the articles that were published in Golkonda Patrika around Andhra Mahasabha. And the third instance, or the third point that I would make, is to establish a relationship between Golkonda Patrika, Saraswata Parishad, and what was the discussion around the spoken language, the spoken Telugu language in Golkonda Patrika, and what these regional elite felt about language. So first, Golkonda Patrika regularly published advertisements of books from Golkonda Patrika press in the periodicals, and it also wrote advertisements and descriptive articles about donations received from the feudal elite and also donations from the Reddy community towards functioning of both Golkonda Patrika and also the Reddy hostel. The periodical and the libraries and the hostels managed by the editor Suravaram Pratap Reddy regularly sought donations, big and small, from landed gentry and affluent communities in general. And like you can see, this is a notice, we can call, that was published in Golkonda Patrika, announcing who all contributed to the Reddy hostel and where are they from and what were their contributions that were made. And the title is Reddy Boarding Naku Viralamulu Chellinchina Varu, the people who donated to the Reddy hostel. And apart from these kinds of donations, they also got substantial. The Reddy hostel was also substantially supported by the Samsthana rulers that I was mentioning earlier. So in another instance, announcing the marriage celebrations of the ruler of Gadwal Samsthan, Golkonda Patrika published a full-page article describing the contributions of the Gadwal royal family to Telugu language, literature, and history. The periodical published a full-page article in which it described in detail the contributions of generations of men from the family to service of Telugu language and the generous donations made for setting up of the Reddy hostel and also the hostel library. I quote from the article. Gadwal Samsthan had contributed rupees 30,000 for the establishment of Reddy hostel and also left rupees 10,000 as a support for later times. Gadwal Maharani is the chief patron of Golkonda Patrika. They spend thousands of rupees and they're continuing to collect shasanas. Apart from spending thousands of rupees, they're also continuing to collect shasanas from Andhra kingdoms and soon are going to publish a book that would trace the genesis of Reddy community to Kshatriyas. During the establishment of Reddy hostel, they donated rupees 5,000 and also 500 books in both Telugu and Urdu. So this kind of I read this excerpt out to establish how there was generous funding from the dominant caste to establish hostels and to and generous funding towards print and publishing efforts. Apart from that, they were also trying to use a certain kind of historical narrations or to establish the like I said that they're going to publish a book called Reddikula Nirnaya Chandrika, which was primarily intended to confer Reddys with the Reddy community to confer the Reddy community with the status of Kshatriyas. So they were at the same time trying to compete. They were engaging with producing literature, history, and also at the same time producing these caste genealogies. And the second instance, so Golkonda Patrika chose to remain moderate in its political expression against the immediate repressive structures of the feudal ruling elite. It published anonymous articles against feudal oppression, but liberally and openly praised the generosity of certain other feudal elite, like in the example that I was reading till now. So Andhra Mahasabha was formed to conduct annual meetings to bring together the concerns of Telugu speakers of the princely state of Hyderabad. And it was organizing itself, Andhra Mahasabha was organizing itself from the patronage received by several Samsthana rulers who belonged to the Velama and the Reddy community. And describing the nature of what would be this, what would be the leadership of such Andhra Mahasabha, John Rusa in his thesis writes, and I quote, the bulk of membership of Andhra Mahasabha was drawn from Deshmukhs, Watandars, and landed village families. A typical Andhra Mahasabha leader in the districts was a son of a landed family, which has paid for his education in the Hyderabad city. And while in the city, he perhaps stayed in the Reddy hostel, where he would have met with leaders of Andhra Mahasabha. Thus, the organization grew with a regular circulation of students in and out of the city. So, if this is the setup of Andhra Mahasabha, and they started convening annual meetings from the year 1930, and in their third annual meeting, which was supposed to happen, which happened in the year 1934, there was a lot of opposition that came from the traditional orthodoxy, which looked at Andhra Mahasabha as some kind of a reformist organization, because at that point of time, throughout Madras presidency and princely state of Mysore, Hyderabad, across Bengal presidency, there was also there was a lot of focus by moderate Congress nationalists on the idea of social reform. And so the orthodoxy kind of believed that Andhra Mahasabha would disturb the existing caste hierarchies and the status quo. So there was a lot of opposition that came against the third Andhra Mahasabha, which was supposed to be organized at which was later on organized at Kammamettu in the year 1934. So Golkonda Patrika, in this instance, because Suravaram Pratapa Reddy was also somebody who was associated with Andhra Mahasabha. He was the convener for the first Andhra Mahasabha meeting and continued his association with Andhra Mahasabha until there was a disruption. There was a conflict between the Congress and the communists that happens later on. I'm not going to discuss that, but in the initial years, he was very closely associated with Andhra Mahasabha and its meetings and its annual meetings. Because he was also managing operations of Golkonda Patrika and also organizing Andhra Mahasabha meetings, Golkonda Patrika became a space for publishing the negotiations that were happening and the announcement, if there were any announcement about Andhra Mahasabha meetings, when and where they are supposed to happen, what was the agenda that was put for discussion. All these things were published in Golkonda Patrika itself. And along with that, they also Golkonda Patrika also became a space where these negotiations were happening between the traditional orthodoxy and the perceived reformists. So there was the organizing. Like I said, the caste pollution became an important point of concern at that point for the third Andhra Mahasabha. And when the Andhra Mahasabha committee managed to get permissions to organize this meeting in Kammamettu, there was an opposition from the local traditionalists, and the article refers to them as Thanika Sanatanalu, who believed that the Sabha would destroy caste order and hurt the sentiments of the dominant castes. And I read an excerpt from the article. ఈ సభ పూర్వాచార పద్ధతులకు విరుద్ధము సాంఘిక విప్లవము కలుగజేయును వర్ణ సంకరము కలుగజేయును. This sabha is against the traditional norms, will cause social unrest or radicalization and cause caste pollution. And this was a critique against the sabha, which was published in Golkonda Patrika. And Golkonda Patrika carried responses of both organizing committee and the social reformists who were in support of organizing Mahasabha and going ahead with it. It published articles of people who wrote to the newspaper requesting the organizing committee of Andhra Mahasabha to arrange separate dining halls based on caste. So people. On 4th October 1934, the organizing committee published a note declaring that the cooking for the meeting will only be done by Brahmins and Vaishyas so as to not hurt the religious sentiments. And separate dining halls shall be made available to the attendees of different communities so that caste sentiments are not disturbed, and that the discussions of the meetings would remain non-political and would not be against any government policy. And parts of the note that was published in Golkonda Patrika read, it has come to our notice that there are baseless rumors that there would be events like temple entry for Harijans and intercaste dining as a part of the Sabha meetings. We, here the organizing committee, we would like to clarify that there are no such events planned from our end. We have no intentions of hurting the sentiments of those who are particular about untouchability or intercaste dining. We received permissions from the government to conduct this meeting, and that itself reflects that we are not going to engage in any discussions against the state. So we request both the traditionalists and also government officials to comfortably attend the meeting and make it a success. Though the article does not really mention who these Sanatanas or the traditionalists were, it implies that they were people. They were essentially people who wanted to keep intact the hierarchies of caste. These are the responses published by Andhra Mahasabha. These excerpts were the ones from these only I was reading till now, the translated ones. Now, I would like to bring attention to the third instance for discussion, where I established the relationship between Golkonda Patrika, Saraswata Parishad, and the spoken Telugu language of the Telangana region of the princely state of Hyderabad. So, Nizam Rashtranda Saraswata Parishad was set up as a solely literary organization in the year 1943. Why I say solely is because, again, Suravaram Pratap Reddy, Madapati Hanumantarao, who were very prominently involved in Andhra Mahasabha initially, kind of break away from it because due to the intervention and predominant rise of the communists in Andhra Mahasabha. And they kind of set up this literary organization called Andhra Saraswata Parishad, and say that we are not going to be political, but we are going to be only literary in this pursuit. So we are going to focus on language and literature and publish literary histories and focus on institutionalizing Telugu language alone. So they kind of wanted to neatly separate political idea and a literary idea, all of which were associated to a region. So they wanted to neatly make these distinctions. And so they set up this Saraswata Parishad to popularize Telugu language and literature. So on 11th, so when they set up this organization, they were both Suravaram Pratap Reddy and Madapati Hanumantarao both were in conversation with the language modernization process that was happening in Madras Presidency, and they were familiar with the language modernization, Telugu language modernization, like standardizing what language should be in the print, what should be the language in the textbooks. Those kinds of discussions were happening in Madras Presidency, and both Survan Pratap Reddy and Madapati Hanumantarao were in support of forwarding the Vyavaharika or the colloquial language for print. So they felt that the colloquial language or the Vyavaharika variant of Telugu would be more easily understood by people, and because of that, it should be the one that which should be popularized in print, in textbooks or in print as well. So but there was a fissure in the imagination. But there was a certain kind of suspicion, or there was a certain kind of lack of there was a certain kind of disdain that they had towards the spoken Telugu variant, that was spoken Telugu variant of the princely state of Hyderabad. And why did they feel it? Because the spoken Telugu variant of the princely state of Hyderabad had influences of Urdu, Persian, Kannada, and Marathi, and therefore it was, according to them, it was not pure, because it had influences from these different languages. So it was not fit for it was not probably Telugu enough. It was not fit for print. On 11th January 1945, Golkonda Patrika, in what seems like an editorial or an opinion piece, publishes an article titled Andhra Saraswata Parishattu, and excerpts from that article are as follows. The Telugu speakers of Telangana, the Telangana Andhras, are far behind in comparison to British Andhras in terms of scientific knowledge and also linguistic fervor. Our language, Telugu, has deteriorated. The Andhras from British India mistake the Telugu, the Telugu spoken, the Andhras from British India mistake the Telugu spoken from our Bois and Harijans to be something other than Telugu. Even when our educated upper class, that is the Reddys and the Golkonda Vyaparis, talk, more than half their words are in Urdu, Persian, and Arabic. And the essence of the rest of the Telugu used is also very crude. If these bad influences or avalakshanamalu have to be wiped out, establishing Andhra Saraswata Parishat is necessary. So this kind of makes it very clear as to what their imagination was for what kind of language should be there in creating literature or history. What should be the medium of instruction? What should be what kind of language were they aiming for? Kind of becomes clearer with this. So I invoked these three instances to understand how region is imagined, to understand how languages and linguistics hierarchies were imagined, and how in foregrounding a certain kind of linguistic identity, certain other forms of identities are linguistic identity is used to kind of seal out, or to kind of create a certain kind of solid. Linguistic identity is deployed as a certain kind of identity or belonging towards the region, and all other forms of identity probably are not brought into the fore of the discussion. And they kind of consider linguistic identity to be a secular identity, which is because language they see as something which is not political. That's what they say while establishing Saraswata Parishat. So language for them is not, or linguistic identity is not political, but it is something that is secular and is available for all, according to them. So the Telugu periodicals managed by the regional elite in the princely state of Hyderabad shared an intimate relationship with literary and political movements, and were shaping the discourse around political futures, education policy, language reform, and literary and historical production. Linguistic identity, like other forms of identities, is historical and is a cultivated process. Languages go through a process of social engineering for them to become functional for administration and educational purposes. When languages have to go through a process of social engineering for them to become functional for administrative and educational purposes, when they have to become resources for a large population and fulfill functions of providing masses with an access to modern education and governance. So linguistic identities and regional identities are therefore interconnected and at the same time cultivated. And Telugu newspapers and periodicals, along with the literary efforts and public institutions during the 20th century, were significantly patronized by the samsthanas and were a part of the larger networks that the regional elite were imagining for a public life in the city. And early print history is also deeply linked to education, modern infrastructure, availability of modern monetary and cultural resources, technological tools for production, and ideological concerns, etc. Hence, it is not possible to refer to all the regional efforts of setting up and running newspapers as sole acts of resistance by reading them against available categories of nation and region. The attempts of the regional elite to create a network of publishing and voluntary associations, though sporadic, kind of reflects conflicts with modernity, continuities and discontinuities with historical past, and competing claims towards technology, tradition, and territory. So it is important to critically engage with historical artifacts like these newspapers or periodicals or any other material that we encounter to create a narrative that is not blinded by or reified by the ideas of nation and region, but instead explores the multiple possibilities provided by the nature of newspapers themselves. During the 20th century, print efforts become instrumental to elite politics. During the 20th century, print efforts become instrumental to elite politics and to modern associational life of the regional elite, the institutions they engaged in, and the active public life that they wanted to cultivate, which they kind of imagined that they could create by generating hostels or creating these organizations like Andhra Mahasabha, Saraswata Parishad. So these institutions that they engaged in and the active public life that they were trying to generate, they felt that it kind of provided them with a dominant presence both in the state machinery, that is the bureaucracy, and also in the literary and political spheres of the Telugu speaking population. And the regional elite presented themselves in a representative position where they felt they were representing the concerns of the Telugu speakers of Telangana. But as discussed so far, there were limitations to this representation. Firstly, most of these institutions, that is periodicals and voluntary associations, like I discussed so far, were run with support and patronage from local rulers and landed elite, and thereby were limited in their criticism against them, which for instance reflects in the discussions that were happening in the context of Andhra Mahasabha and the third meeting that I was talking about. Secondly, while engaging in activities of reform by opposing child marriages and supporting caste reforms in the Hindu society, they continue to work well within the hierarchies of caste. So because they also went on to publish caste genealogies. Thirdly, even when the regional elite considered themselves as proponents of Telugu language of Telangana, intellectuals like Suravaram and Madapati considered the spoken variant of Telugu unfit for any literary production due to the influences it had from Urdu, Persian, Marathi, and Kannada, and felt that the influences of other languages made Telugu of Telangana impure or polluted. Thus, the regional elite were at the same time in their efforts complementary and contradictory in their efforts of modernizing Telugu language and also generating a certain kind of modern public life. So their efforts were both complementary and also contradictory in generating discussions around language and also in cultivating these public spaces. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Himabindu. Professor Manohar, over to you.
Yeah, could you just tell me what is the format like? I spend some time and then open it for discussion to others, right? Is that generally?
Yeah, I think you can briefly comment on Himabindu's presentation and perhaps engage her with a few questions, and then we can open it up to the audience as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think I am quite clearly audible.
Yes, sir. You're very audible.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Himabindu, for that really very interesting presentation, and particularly that's something that I am interested in. Although I'm not really an expert in this field, but I have some deep interest in the field. See, 2-3 things that occur to me that are interesting in your presentation is the whole project of modernity, how it's quite, I think, different from the way it emerged in the coastal Andhra. I mean, there are certain similarities, but also there seems to be very clear differences in the way the whole modernity project was taken up and how the regional elite kind of unfolded the modernity project in both regions seem to be quite different. One thing that occurred to me is, I mean, I'm sure you have probably read all this about what happened in the coastal Andhra region about the language modernization, the Gurujada and Gidugu, which is quite well known now. Anyone who were interested in who have read about it. But just for the sake of the audience who are not familiar, I just will explain in a minute that the whole effort there was for Gurujada, Gidugu, Ramut, and various others was actually to modernize Telugu in such a way that Sanskrit words, they had to actually, the conflict was, the fight was against the use of Sanskritized Telugu. So in a way, what was happening, seems to be happening in the Telangana is when they were trying to modernize Telugu here, there was an attempt to purge Persian and Urdu words from the Telugu. In a way, it's a kind of a purification project, which seems to be quite similar that happened during the nationalist period in North India in the language of Hindi. Because Hindi nationalism had to somehow transform Hindi language itself. I think Alok Roy has written a book called Hindi Nationalism, where he explains that along with Indian nationalist movement, the Sanskritization of Hindi also happened, which is very different from what happened to many other Indian languages in India. So here, strangely, in the southern India, Telangana alone seems to be similar to that kind of a project. Only here. I don't think that kind of an attempt happened, whether it's in any other part of the south. So it seems to be specific to the project of Telugu modernization here. That is one. Second, the whole modernity project is also about creating a new sense of people. The idea of the people taking charge of their lives in the modern times, whether it is in the field of education or administration or judiciary. And that's why we need, or they needed to use people's language in every sphere of life. Unlike in kingdoms or in empires where classical languages or the languages of rulers were the official languages, whether here you have people's languages coming in. But interestingly here, if let's say the Urdu words are seen as a misfit in the in the new Telugu that they are going to create, whether it has only a linguistic, was it only a linguistic element, or was it also anything to do with their own imagination or how they imagined the new public sphere? Did that public sphere include Muslims here, or does it exclude Muslims is a question. Caste, I think, seems to be quite clear. The nature of the public that they are trying to create is definitely an upper caste public sphere. It seems to me the responses to the caste question, the way these elite responded to the caste question, it seems more like the consolidation of, let's say, the Reddy community or maybe the Velamas to some extent, rather than doing away with the caste element of their life. So that's another interesting thing that seems to have happened during this period. While in coastal Andhra, the large number of people who were involved in the modernization of project were actually Brahmins. Whereas here, it seems to be different. It seems to be either the Reddys or probably the Velamas in terms of caste. So I would be really interested in knowing how the Muslims responded to this kind of a modernization project. I mean, if we really want to understand what Golkonda Patrika was trying to do, it may be an interesting thing to see what did Muslims think about Golkonda Patrika's efforts. Because at that time, I think intellectuals still were not like, their expertise were not just in one language. They had expertise in both the languages or more languages than the two. So do you have anything to say about, for example, the Hinduization of Telugu, which seems to be the case to me? And do you want to explicitly talk about that more or write about it more? So if there was something called Hinduization of Telugu. And if something of that kind happened, then how do we connect with the entire modernization project and the modernization of Telugu, particularly, connect with the pan-Indian nationalist movement? So do we understand this as they seems to have claimed it's a cultural project, but it doesn't seem so to me. It's clearly a political project. So how do we understand its relation with pan-Indian nationalist project? Because apparently they were in the Nizam's rule, but also seems to have aspirations to connect with the world outside it, whether it is the coastal Andhra, which is under the British, or also you mentioned that Thururuthu Reddy identifies himself as a moderate Congress person. So how do we understand that relationship is one question. So if modernization project was, if the European modernity was all about, let's say, popular sovereignty, achieving popular sovereignty, that is people taking charge of their lives, as it were. And if, let's say, the Bahujans or Dalits, these communities don't seem to figure in this public sphere, then probably that is something to investigate more about. What were the Bahujans or Dalits also trying to do here? Were there any? Recently I attended a conference where it was about the small journals. And the people who came from Kerala and Tamil Nadu, they presented a remarkable kind of a research work where they found dozens and dozens of journals which were actually run by Bahujans and Dalits. And until that research happened, it was generally assumed that there were no journals of this kind. And even today, that we believe that there were no journals, for example, by Adivasis in Telugu. But I know in 1950s, in the 1950s to 60s, for 10 years, there was a small journal which was run from Vijayawada and Guntur, which is actually called Adivasi, and it was run by Erukalas and Yanaris. It's a remarkable thing, and I'm trying to find a little more and maybe probably write about it. So the question is, did anything of that kind happen, and how did they view this project? Whether they were excluded from such a project, etc., is also something to be interested in. But the consolidation of Reddis, because you mentioned that they were claiming for Kshatriya status, that is another interesting area to look at. That what exactly was this, and what were they actually claiming there for when they were claiming for Kshatriya status? What is the significance of that, right? And how did print media contribute or whatever role that it played in that entire project? So those were, I think, the general questions. But Urdu print media is another. I mean, I would be interested in not only how Muslims responded, but parallelly you had Urdu print media developing. So what kind of relationship that Golkonda Patrika, for example, had with Urdu media as such is another interesting thing probably. So I would just stop there, and then we could have more questions. I mean, I have a few more questions, but I think I would stop here and then have a conversation.
So I will start by addressing your questions. On the last one, you were talking about Urdu print media. I am limited in my language capacity, so I cannot. My Urdu proficiency has been very basic, and I've not been able to access larger archives in Urdu. But I have accessed the secondary material that has been like Kavita Datla's work on Kavita Datla's work, and the Urdu print media kind of refers to is referred largely when it comes to the discussions or the language debates that were happening between Urdu and Telugu when Usmania University was established and Urdu was made the medium of instruction. So when those discussions relating to what should be the language or the medium of instruction, during those discussions, Urdu media emerges predominantly. And regarding the popular sovereignty and inclusion of Bahujans, of course, they were not included in their imaginary of the public sphere, in the regional elite imaginary of the public sphere. And they were merely like Golkonda Patrika would publish, would regularly announce newspapers that were being published from different, because it was one of the biggest periodicals of its times from in Telugu from this region. So it would it would announce that, okay, there is a new periodical, that new newspaper that is being launched, or a new, and then it would publish book reviews and stuff like that. And in passing, it talks about the Adi Hindu organization, which was set up and run by Bhagyareddy Verma, and it also announces the launch of Adi Hindu Patrika of that point. But then I have not seen that any dialogue happening between these. And interestingly, Bhagyareddy Verma happens to attend or be a part of one of the initial meetings of Andhra Mahasabha, and later I think kind of dissociates himself, where he wants to kind of bring in a reform against untouchability. And while he was going to speak or make his points, some people kind of walk out of the Sabha, and that is something that is recorded. And regarding the relationship of language, Telugu language and Hinduization of Telugu and its relationship with the pan-India nationalist project. All the regional elite particularly wanted to associate themselves with the emerging Indian Union, and that's why they, even if we see the headers of Golkonda Patrika or Saraswata headers of Golkonda Patrika, it calls itself Jatiya Patrika, which is a national newspaper. In writing the header itself, it makes its stance very clear, and it is very moderate in its lines, just like the proponents of just like Suravaram Pratap Reddy and the editors involved. And to elaborate a little more on what was their imagination of Islam or Muslim population, or the in 1949, Suravaram Pratap Reddy publishes book called Andhra Sangika Charitra, which translates to Social History of Andhras. And there are different sections. They start from Eastern Chalukyas, Aitareya Brahmana, and tracing the Telugu lineage to that, and then talk about then current status, which was the early 20th century. By the time they start talking about Golkonda Sultanate, and they talk about the Asaf Jahis. They describe this history through an invader logic, and Paradhina Yugamu is what they translate. So they very clearly wants to dissociate from the princely state of Hyderabad, and they very and uphold their Hindu caste hierarchy and dominance. And your first question, I think, was in relation to whether their idea was only whether language, as they say, whether it is not political, because it is very clearly political. So it is in their imagination, they kind of say that this is the binary that we are functioning with. That's not the binary that I have given. It's how they self-define themselves, that we are language is not political, and literature, we will keep the literary activity of Saraswata Parishad distinct and separate from the political activity of the communists associated with then who were associated with Andhra Mahasabha. So that distinction is something that they kind of create in their writings. That's, of course, it's artificial, and we agree that language is essentially political in its making. And the modernity project, if we see in the Madras presidency, the modernization, like you pointed out, it was predominantly led by Brahmins, and and there was also a non-Brahmin movement that was happening at that point of time, with influence from the Madras presidency and the Dravidian movement that was there, where so, and if we see in the context of the Telugu speakers of Andhra, coastal Andhra, the non-Brahmin movement kind of is taken over by Kammas to kind of question the authority of Brahmins. Eventually, it becomes like that. And similarly, I think here, the Reddy community kind of wants to displace the Brahmin dominance and establish themselves as powerful, both not just as in terms of material resources, but also cultivating cultural resources. Did I miss anything?
No. I was thinking, like, was there a Brahmin domination here that they were fighting here? And also in the coastal Andhra region, I mean, the intervention of Brahmins continues. I mean, continued for a very long time. And it's, the anti-Brahmin movement in coastal Andhra was very, very insignificant compared to what happened in Tamil Nadu. In fact, there was a lot of resistance to anti-Brahmin, anything that was anti-Brahmin here, except very little effort.
Yeah, it was marginal even here. I don't think there was any significant thing in this place, but I think there was some kind of an influence. But
so the question is, the Sanskritization of Telugu doesn't seem to be, I mean, the Sanskritized Telugu, to fight against the Sanskritized Telugu doesn't seem to be was an issue here. That is what I figured out from your presentation.
Yes, because I think they were kind of placing it against this. There was more communal tension that was being associated to language from the regional elite, from the side of the regional elite, I think. Because there was no discussion around, while there was a lot of debate on Telugu language modernization that was happening and desanskritization that they were trying for in coastal Andhra. Here, I think around in the early 20th century, the more debates were whether we should, how to institutionalize Telugu. What Telugu should be institutionalized is not something that they were discussing so much. Because if we look at the print, they kind of accepted what was the print language of Madras Presidency. It was a similar language that was accepted and published here, because I've checked Andhra Patrika and Golkonda Patrika to see what is the language similarity, and the language used is very similar in both the newspapers.
Somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, but Suroram Tapuridi wrote about the language of the Boyas.
Sorry, sir?
Boya community.
Boya community, yes.
Boya community, which are like ethnic tribals.
Yeah.
So he ridicules their language, and just like the spoken Telugu movement proponents in the Andhra actually ridiculed the language of the Dalits, what they call Gramyam. That while they were at one hand fighting against Sanskritization of Telugu, they were on the other hand saying that the language spoken by the marginalized communities was not fit to be used in literature. I mean, we can understand that standardization of language, was a requirement anywhere in the world for, let's say, education or administration or judiciary, but not so much in literature. Literature is more adaptive to and more open to the use of many different kinds of dialects or varieties of language. Whereas here, they were definitely trying to keep away the language spoken by the marginalized community. That was in the coastal Andhra. And that kind of a thing, I think, was very much part of, I think, Surovaram Prataparidi's imagination, because he specifically wrote about the language of the Boyas, but that's like an example that he took. So that's.
Yeah, I just quoted it. Cited the thing because in my last thing when I talk about Saraswata Parishat, in the quote that I read, he kind of he says that the Andhras from the British India mistake the Telugus of our Boyas and Harijans to be something other than Telugu. That is a translation that I had read out for to see what kind of a thing that they were thinking with in terms.
Yeah, and he looks like he's in agreement with that. He's not complaining. I mean, he seems to be in agreement with what the Andhra people said about it, and therefore stressing the point that it needs to be reformed. Yeah. Please carry on, and if you have anything more to say, or we should open it for discussion.
Yamini, what is?
You are done?
Yeah.
Yes, we can open it up for conversations.
Yes.
If anyone has, if anyone has, go ahead, Chandrasekhar. Please unmute yourself.
Himabindu, this is wonderful presentation. Quickly, I wanted to know two things. One is, as Manohar was telling, we have been thinking to, archive, look for some of these Telugu journals, particularly in the context of marginalized people. Like, are there any journals which discuss issues or Dalit movement during colonial period? So, first thing I wanted to know whether, is there any discussion in this Golkonda Patrika? Because it was the same time it started, I think, in 1920. So by then it was there, the Dalit movement or Dalit issues very much in Hyderabad area. So that is one question. Second thing is, same by then there was a lot of Christian missionary activity in, Hyderabad, the Secunderabad area. So I just wanted to know, is there any discussion in this Patrika regarding the missionary activity also. Yeah, those two I wanted to ask.
Himabindu, shall we take a few more questions before you answer, just to be mindful of the time?
Yes,
Is that
yes.
okay? If anyone else has questions, please.
Pramod said, go ahead.
Yes.
Hi, Himabindu. Thank you for a presentation. I have 2-3 questions. One is this period, if you look at, there are many single caste organizations are coming up, not just in this place, many places. Like you spoke about a Reddy hostel. So what is it happening about other caste, single caste organization? How do they are talking about modernization project? How do they are dealing with that modernization project? One question. The other question is, even in this period, Arya Samaj and Hindu Mahasabha are very active. So what kind of a give and take influences on thinking about language are happening in this period? So the third question is, Manohar sir has already asked. I just want to push you little bit about what kind of there is an Madras. You said that even Surya Pratap Reddy, he came from Madras and all that. So there you see there is a very strong non-Brahmin movement is going on. So what kind of influences they bring it in a Hyderabad kind of in a space, and how do they articulate non-Brahmin movement? How do they respond to that kind of non-Brahmin? Not just a non-Brahmin, a lot of other things they were coming up. And a last question is, how do they see as even in so lot of demand, at least from Maharashtra, Marathwada region, it was going on about demand for an Marathi schools. And you spoke little bit about libraries, but what are the ways in which schools are articulated? How do they see the Usmania University? And so these are some. Thank you.
Himabindu, do you want to answer? Like, I think there's a lot of questions already spoken.
Yeah. So regarding Chandrasekhar's question on the Christian missionary activity, the Golkonda Patrika published a lot of articles around conversions that were happening at that point of time into Christianity, and they were very much against the conversions in the articles that I've come across. I do not discuss those in elaboration, but I've made a note of the kind of things that were happening during that period of time. And regarding, and was there something else you had asked? Did I miss?
Yeah, Dalit movement and Dalit issues discussion.
Yes, yeah, Dalit movement. They like I was talking when I was talking answering the questions with Dr. Manohar, there was not much discussion on the Dalit movement that was happening at that point of time. Largely, whenever the discussion of caste was brought out, it was in relation to the reform of the Congress. It was in that spirit that they would talk about caste. And coming to Pramod's question on single caste organizations and modernization projects, yes, there was a lot of emergence. There were a lot of single caste organizations that were set up, and they publish reform activities that were happening in these within these communities, predominantly the BC communities. So they published articles around. So one, it's a related thing in the sense that for the first time, I had noted an article that has come across that I came across on the Munur Kapu community, which is a BC community in Telangana, and they published an article saying that for the first time there was a Brahmin who who came to perform the wedding ritual in that community. So it was not until the early decades of 20th century the Brahmins have an intervention in into the marriage rituals of even the Bahujan communities. And they would set up, they would announce the establishment of these single caste organizations. And Hindu Mahasabha and Arya Mahasabha had a predominant presence, and they were against conversions that were happening. And Golkonda Patrika did not want to be explicitly communal in that sense, but because it was, again, had to be with Congress, it had to be with the nationalist movement, so they were moderate in their, they would critique this conversion, they would say that they would write against conversions, but they were not like fully in support of any of these activities of any of these organizations. And articulation of non-Brahmin movement. So in the preface of Andhra Sangika Charitra, Suravaram Pratapareddy writes that he writes that a lot of Brahmins were given, a lot of Shudras gave money to Brahmins and have gotten histories written saying, and because of that, a lot of Brahmins kind of conferred Shudras Kshatriya status by tracing their lineage to either Surya Vamsha or Chandra Vamsha. So this kind of thing was something that Suravaram Pratapareddy writes in Andhra Sangika Charitra. Marathi articulation is something that I think I'm inadequate to respond to.
Himabindu, I think there are 2 questions in the chat box. Can you see that?
Yeah. How about
I'm not,
Arya Sabha, Arya Samaj? I think I just answered that. I cannot turn on, but I have a question about Telugu-speaking Muslim public. When did they begin to emerge in?
Yeah, it's from Ayub Khan.
Yeah, did they have any dedicated newspapers pre-1948? Telugu-speaking Muslim public.
Shall I just read it out for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Manohar.
Yeah, I think Umarani, there is one question. How about the association of Arya Samaj to the princely state of Hyderabad literacy movement?
I am not sure. I'm not equipped to answer that question. It has not come under the purview of my research. Okay,
then question from Ayub Khan I have a question about the Telugu-speaking Muslim public. When did they begin to emerge in the Telugu print culture, in the newspapers, periodicals? Did they have any dedicated newspapers pre-1948?
Telugu-speaking Muslim public, when did they I'm not sure actually. I'm really sorry.
See, there are Telugu-speaking Muslims in definitely in the Telangana region. Right? Probably, you could rephrase the question about have you found out anything about what is their presence in the modernization of Telugu project or in the literature?
I have not come across, actually, I have not come across a Telugu-speaking Muslim population in the Telugu literature or the public sphere. My understanding is until recently, I have not come across that kind of work. I could be, probably, I think when it kind of comes together when between the discussions between Andhra Mahasabha and the communist movement that was happening around that time. I'm not sure about this question.
Right.
Dr. Hima, I have a small question.
Yeah, yes.
When we talk about princely state of Hyderabad,
yes,
I was just wondering what was the role of these newspapers and the print media, whatever was there, during the times of independence struggle. Were they what were the papers actually telling, or what was the print media actually telling about the freedom movement? Were they aligned towards the rulers of that particular Hyderabad princely state, or were they aligned towards the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose way of thinking, or were they aligned towards the Satyagraha sort of Indian National Congress movement? Were they actually reflecting the thought process of the local people of Hyderabad princely state, or were they more aligned towards the rulers of the Hyderabad princely state? What was any findings from your research? Can you please throw some light on that?
So beyond these local people, or the local people of Hyderabad, or the princely state of Hyderabad, which is the ruling state, with the, like I've said throughout the presentation in the beginning itself and throughout the discussion, that they identified the proponents of the Telugu public sphere, the regional elite, identified themselves with the nationalist movement, which is a Gandhian nationalist movement, and they identified themselves as moderate Congress nationalists, and they positioned this newspaper also as a nationalist newspaper, and the organizations that they set up as nationalist organizations. Any more questions?
Thank you for that, Dr. Hima.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Bullana. I don't think we're able to hear you.
I cannot hear you.
Mr. Bullana, we're not able to hear you speak. If there's anyone else who would like to ask a question while Mr. Bullana figures out, we can go ahead.
Maybe
So-
he can type it out if he has something.
Yeah, that may be a good idea. Yeah. Meanwhile, at some place, Himabindu was saying that the attempts of the regional elite to create a network of publishing and civil society continues. I mean, though sporadic, reflect and conflicts with modernity, continuities and discontinuities with historic past, competing claims to technology, tradition and territory, etc. It wasn't very clear to me what you wanted to actually say from that. You want to say something?
Yeah. So what I was trying to say by invoking the idea of territory, technology, and tradition is that they do not want to completely, the regional elite did not want to completely dissociate themselves from the traditional authority that they were getting by being a part of the Hindu caste society. And they also wanted to have access to these modern technologies. And through these, and also at the same time claim their dominance in the territorial boundaries or the territorial imagination that they had for the Telangana region within the princely state of Hyderabad. So they kind of, all these efforts were kind of mixed and merging together to create a dominant, to continue their dominance, their traditional dominance that they were drawing from caste and class hierarchies, and to continue that kind of traditional dominance in their continue their dominance in the modern secular associations that they were wanting to establish through because the political future of Hyderabad, then they were imagining it based on the representative governance. So they wanted it to be, so the alignment of aligning with the nationalist movement and aligning with the Telugu speakers of the Madras presidency, at least at that point of time, kind of would be, it was a certain kind of strategy. It was a strategic affiliation that they were drawing with the Telugu speakers of Madras presidency based on commonalities of language, and that language could bring together the idea of territory. Initially, they kind of do not want. They were while they are talking all of these in through the decades of 19th century, and they were kind of trying to draw solidarity with the Madras presidency in the during the early decades. They kind of shift later on in the 1950s, and Golkonda Patrika starts publishing against Vishalandra movement of that time.
So in the same place, it was that I was a bit confused, because when you're talking about the imagination of region and nation, you also say it's important to critically engage with historical artifacts to create a narrative that's not blinded by reified ideas of nation and region, but instead explore the multifaceted possibilities provided by the nature of the newspapers themselves that escape the existing categories. So you seems to be suggesting that they were not actually working with reified ideas of nation or region.
What I was trying to say is that when we look at like during the Telangana movement and now post Telangana movement, we are now in a federal state, and so when we are getting into trying to do research and entering research, I kind of felt like most of the times we try to say that we need to create an immediate distinction between Telangana and Andhra. And there should be a distinct historical past and a distinct literature, distinct art form, or a distinct dance form in that sense, that would make this region the region it is. And immediately we would draw this binary or boundary and say, okay, we are different from the Andhra counterpart. During the Telangana movement, it was essential to come together based on Telangana language style or those kinds of unities at that point of time, the solidarities that people came together for was based on this based on the lack of job opportunities in the mechanism and stuff in the state machinery and stuff. So the broad point that I was trying to make is that we should not look at these historical artifacts like Golkonda Patrika or any other artifact as something that would define any region's identity. We need to be critical of these artifacts when we are invoking them for creating a consolidated identity of any region. We need to be critical of those artifacts themselves, because if these artifacts, if we do not, like K. Balagopal says, that if we do not critique the history of such kind, we kind of fall into the trap of imagining the region merely based on geographical boundaries, and do not kind of imagine it based on socially just, do not cultivate socially just imaginaries in understanding a region. So easily available reified ideas of region and nation is something that we need to be critical of, is what I was actually trying to say. I don't know, maybe I was not clear.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I think, Yamini, is it time to wind up, or we have time to take some more questions if there are?
I have one more question. Excuse me.
Okay, yeah,
please
go ahead.
Collecting archival material is laborious work. So please tell me, where have you collected this material? One thing, and second thing is, what are all other Telugu journals which we can find there? We really wanted to know various available Telugu journals in different places. So please tell us.
Yeah, the archives of Golkonda Patrika, I actually got it from Dr. Manohar Reddy himself. He was the one who provided us with resources for of both Golkonda Patrika, Hitabodhini, and also Hyderabad Samacharam, which is a state-run journal from the princely state of Hyderabad. It was published by Information Bureau of the princely state of Hyderabad. All of these archives we've got from Professor Manohar Reddy himself. And I kind of tried going to different places in the city, state library and all, but I have not been able to get access to other journals. But in a recent presentation, I think it was Dr. Sangishetty Srinivas who kind of showed, because this particular magazine, this particular journal is a moderate Congress nationalist journal, and what was the understanding, the communists were also publishing their own periodicals at that point of time. I fail to recollect the name. It was invoked in the presentation of Mizan. Mizan is the periodical. It was published in multiple languages. It was published in Telugu. It was published in Urdu and also English. I have not been able to access it, but it seems to be some copies of it apparently are available somewhere. I do not know.
So Mizan was available on the AP State, the AP Press Archives. The Urdu at least was available.
Yeah,
and I'm just answering also, just adding to what Chandrasekhar asked. So Afzalganj Library has CDs of several of these, newspapers and periodicals. But I mean, they're in CD format and no other format, and it is not easy to access. But if you persist, then you might find, like, they have categorized and they have it all there. But it's like they only let you access on their computers, so it's a time taking. These pre-47 multiple things. I won't say everything is there, but to a certain extent they are there in Afzalganj Library. Yeah.
I think Mr. Pulana has a question. I hope they're able to hear you. We still can't hear you. Sorry, I think we'd have to call this, bring this to an end. Please put anything in the chat. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much.
Sorry, Swati, to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask one question. So what happened to Golkonda Patrika eventually? Did it shut down? Is it still around?
So Golkonda Patrika continued to function as a bi-weekly for a long period of time. And in the 1960s, late 1950s, 60s, it becomes a daily. And it stops, like, so far it keeps getting funding from different different samsthanas or donations or subscriptions that they were getting. And later period of time, once it becomes a daily, it also starts its stand sales and everything. And the proprietorship shifts to someone else. I think it is Nukal Narottam Reddy, and then it eventually shuts down because it cannot sustain. By then, a lot of till that point of time, probably Telangana, that was the only periodical that was functioning in the predominantly functioning. There were a lot of, there was a very big periodical at that point of time, but later on, with annexation of princely state into this region of Telangana into the Andhra Pradesh, we see a lot of other newspapers also come into the print ecosystem. And and it eventually becomes small. It eventually perishes. Just like in the Andhra Patrika at some point was very big, and it continues to function until like the 90s. And then it kind of shuts down when bigger corporations kind of take it. By then, the print markets open up more widely, and a lot more competition happens. Thank you for those.
Okay. I'm very tempted, so I'm going to just ask one question. I wanted to ask you, the newspaper is called Golkonda Patrika. Is there an explanation of the name itself, and why Golkonda? Is that connected to some imagination of like a Telugu region, etc.?
Yeah. So Golkonda Patrika, initially this is from the biographies and the excerpts and the historical works that Suravara Prathapareddy and Madapati Hanumantra have written. They say that they want to name itself initially some Andhra Patrika or something like that, or Telugu, to invoke some kind of a Telugu thing, but they stopped themselves, saying that immediately they would the state would probably make a connection with the anti-colonial and nationalist struggle that was happening in Madras presidency, and it might not get permissions to start. So, and they kind of and then there is this they also want to invoke this Golkonda Sultanate and the kingdom prior to Asafjahi's. So as a mid path between these, they name it Golkonda Patrika.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. And I think we should let Himabindu rest. It's been a very long conversation with her. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing so much of your work and engaging all of us with it. And also thank you very much to Dr. Manohar. I think you made the conversation much more fascinating than it already was. The presentation was. So thank you again for being with us through all this. And thank you to everybody in the audience as well for staying through the conversation. And we hope to see you next, which is on April 29th, right, Yamini? 26th, April 26th. We'll have Pramod, who is an IIT Bombay scholar working on looking at Hyderabad to the Marathwada region. So we're very excited to have that conversation as well. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Yamini, Swati, and Himabindu, for asking me to be with you people here this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manu. Thank you so much, Khidki Collective, for having me over. I was very excited to present this work and be a part of it. And I'm really, really happy that all of you have come together to engage with my work. And it's a very humbling experience. And it's always exciting to talk to scholars with similar interests, and very exciting to know that a lot of people are involved in engaging with this, with the Deccan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We actually learned a lot from the presentation.
Yes, so much.
Looking forward to continue this with you. Engaging with you as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.